coming out. If anybody missed that, this is George Rettas. He is the MD and over at CITI in the Global Information Security Department, and he's also the Chief of Staff. So I just want to start off by kind of asking if you can explain to us really what your day-to-day looks like and what your role and scope is over at CITI.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for having me. David, thanks for having me. Throw a great shindig here. I got a bar right in the room. Pizza, beer. Comes every single day, I promise. But being the Chief of Staff is a really interesting position because you get to go across all the verticals of information security. Right? It's just not one job focused on one specific discipline. So you kind of support all the different functions underneath the global head of information security. My job today is, as the Chief of Staff, also includes the CIO of the department. So I'm the Chief Administrative Officer of the entire department. So I have like the strategy, planning, and governance oversight globally for what we do. So I have a risk team. We look up material risk, and we engage what we call our OTRC team. We also have a policy team. We have a regulatory management team, an audit management team, process improvement teams. We have a talent management team, which is big. We're probably going to have to talk about talent management tonight. I would imagine it's like a top issue in cybersecurity right now. We have a communications function, and business analysis and reporting team. I run the PMO, which is our program management office, for governance and oversight of our program management structure. Also in charge of strategy for the team. So we run strategy globally, which is like a really cool part of the job because we get to talk to everybody, get their opinions, and kind of establish what we're going to do moving forward and how we're going to do it. And then, of course, we have our strategic financial planning and analysis function, which is basically our budget function. One of the cool things I get to do is board gaming. That's where all the cool kids hang out, really. So that's a lot of fun, and so everybody wants to be on the board gaming team. And we can probably talk a little bit about that if anybody has any questions about that. And then right now, I actually handle the identity and access management program and also the insider threat program.
Great, that's a lot of teams. Do you mind walking us through how many people you oversee now versus when you started?
Versus when I started? When I came in, I came in just managing the CIO function. It was about 30, 31, 33 people, something like that globally. Now it's about 283, but it's not just the CIO function, right? It's the programs too. The identity and access management program makes up a good chunk of those people. And then we started building new programs like the insider threat program and things like that. So it's sort of, my team has grown in a different way, organically in some ways, and then in other ways through additions and things like that.
Okay, you were talking about the talent management aspect of it. What did you find challenging in bringing that many people on? That's big growth.
Yeah, so it's huge, right? So I think the reason why people is every single day, every person on the team is in charge of the talent management. Every single person should be recruiting as a part of their business and part of their responsibilities every day. So when you think about the talent crisis, and it is a crisis that we're having in cybersecurity with a practically 0% unemployment rate in this space. I think there's 2,500 CISO positions open today in the United States. And I've seen numbers about 300,000 analyst positions open across the country, up to 1 million worldwide, because the cybersecurity talent doesn't exist to fill those positions, right? So when you look at the spend in the cybersecurity space, I think it's about maybe 70 billion, it's supposed to go up to around 150, 170 billion by 2019. And so not only is there any space to fill those positions today, but the growth is exponential almost. And so when you think about it, I mean, in a few years we're supposed to have up to 6 million cybersecurity professionals worldwide. Where are we going to fill those positions and how are we going to do it? So very, very challenging. And you got to start with the young folks, I think. You got to start getting people into cybersecurity, getting trained in the colleges, and we're doing a lot of that. A lot of them engaging in universities and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you have a great background, and you have kind of an untraditional route of kind of getting to this space. Can you give us an overview of how you started and how you got to the position that you're at now?
Sure. I wouldn't recommend my career path to anyone. So if you look at my career path, it kind of spells out confusion in a lot of different ways. But I kind of really didn't know. So I went to Florida State, as you did. Right, so I graduated with a degree in criminology, and I decided that I wanted to go work on Wall Street. I can't figure out why. I mean, so I got a degree. First, I had a great
criminology program. I think we're like number 1 or 2 in the world at the time, and they still are very great in that area. And so I got a job as a stockbroker with a firm down in Tampa, and I came home to train, and then I started getting distracted, and I started interviewing Wall Street firms while I was training, and then I started getting job offers with companies on Wall Street, sort of just talking my way into these jobs. And I took a job as a bond broker on Wall Street, across the street from the stock exchange. Of course, that made my employer really, really mad and I don't recommend doing something like that. So they were really upset. And I was there for a few months, and I kind of got a little restless. I had some great opportunities. They wanted to, and when I think back about it, they wanted to actually buy a place to live on Water Street, so I didn't have to, and it was great. I mean, I think about it now, what was I thinking? I actually did that. I must be out of my mind, right? So I left and became a police officer. I can't figure out why I did that. I mean, almost immediately after they asked me, and my boss was the coolest guy, too. He was a great guy, right? And I just don't know what I was thinking. I wanted to really work on the institutional desk, and I was a little impatient, right? And I was doing some sort of more of the consumer stuff. And so I went back and I took a job as a police officer. I was there for 8.5 years, and then I said to myself that I think I want to do something a little bit different. I met this individual who had a great influence on my life. He was the CISO of a pharmaceutical company, and I told him what I was doing. And at the time, I just told him, I did all these things. I got promoted to positions, and I accomplished these things. I made all these things. I got off to a good start. I was like, a good start. I just killed myself to get where I am today, right? What is he talking about? So he was right. He was a decent star, but there's so much more to do. And it's his influence that I applied to the Secret Service. And I only applied to the Secret Service. A lot of people want to federal government, they want to apply to a whole bunch of different agencies and try to get in a bunch. I just applied to one agency and knew exactly what I wanted. In my humble opinion, I thought that they were the premier law enforcement agency in the world. And they had a dual mission. They had a protection mission, and they also had, protecting critical financial infrastructures, which was really cool. So there wasn't anybody else that I could see that really had that dual mission to give you the skill sets to maybe, move on to other things. So went there, was there for about 5 years, worked with a fantastic group of people. I was in the New York field office, and did a bunch of crazy things. Just a lot of confusion. I was a firearms instructor. I was a specialist in firearms and tactics. And then I started doing forensics. They put together really well. I couldn't figure it out. So I started taking forensic training, and I was lucky enough to get into that. I was lucky enough to be working on a great case when we were there called Operation Firewall that sort of propelled me into the financial sector. We started the Electronic Crimes Task Force in New York, which was like a really cool thing. And we did some great things there. It just happened to be at the right place at the right time, had the right informant, had the right experience from other places. And we were able to bring down the largest organized crime group in the world at the time, several organized crime group in the world, called Shadow Group. And it was the first Title III wiretap in an internet-facing computer network in United States history. So it was talking to the judge, and the judge is looking at me you better know what you're doing. Right? No one's ever done this before. And we were telling him how we're going to do a minimization exercise. And if you ever see organized crime movies, and you see Tony Soprano, and the guys are in the van, and they're talking about minimization, and it's okay, wait, to shut it off now because he's talking about his doctor or whatever. Try doing that on a computer network. How do you do that? So it's never been done before. So we did that, it was great, and then I went to JP Morgan Chase. I got an opportunity there. I spent about 8.5 years there. And we were lucky. We went into JP Morgan, we built the first intelligence team, and we started doing things that we're used to doing in the government. And so we were very ops focused. Because we had this operations background. And so we built intelligence teams, the CISO teams, and the investigation forensics teams weren't really prevalent back then either. I think it was the first, back then, it was one of the first real intelligence teams in the financial sector. And then that's it. I spent about 8.5 years there, and then I just came over to Citigroup about 1.5 years ago. And it's been a great experience. I mean, it's only working with a wonderful group of people, and the leadership here is incredible. So.
It's great, definitely untraditional, right?
Yeah, I don't recommend that career path to get to
well, after that, do you recommend law enforcement as a background? Do you find that that's a...
So it depends. So I held a few positions that, absolutely, the law enforcement background was almost imperative to being successful in those positions. Obviously, having the clearance from the government, having the experience with both investigations and intelligence, having the contacts in law enforcement, being able to make that phone call and making contacts everywhere from an investigative perspective was key. One of the positions I held at JP Chase was that no one had investigative services. So I was in charge of all the investigations, both internally and externally. I think at one point we were doing 70,000 investigations. We had like 500 people. We filed like, a good deal of suspicious activity reports like we were required to do, in the tens of thousands. So it was a major operation. So to run something like that, I think you'll see a lot of former law enforcement people do that. And then making that transition into technology, having both those skill sets and then managing your career, actually it was extremely difficult. Extremely difficult. I moved into the technology department at JP Morgan Chase. And then from there, I moved into the technology department at Citigroup. So, and we also have many former law enforcement people in our what we call CSIS, is our City Security Information Services. And so a lot of people I know from my former life there too.
Yeah. Great, thank you for that. I want to delve a little bit deeper into your role as you've discussed in other settings before, mostly around how you've developed thinking models for strategic planning.
Yeah, sure. So strategic planning is one of the cool parts of the job. So I think more and more, if you look at what's going on today with the framework that's being, especially in the financial sector, the frameworks that are being put out there, we have a lot of capability assessments, and people are saying, okay, how do you assess your capability against the threat today? So I think you have to be able to intelligently articulate exactly how you're coming to the conclusions that you're coming to when you put out your strategy. Okay, here's your strategy. How did you get to that strategy? Believe it or not, I think what we really need to do today is put a tremendous amount of effort into this, because it's really the qualitative answers that they're looking for. All right, if I often they sit back and they say, well, if someone came to you in your organization right now and said that you're, what are you between a rating of 1 to 5? 5 being the strongest and 1 being the weakest in your infrastructure defense, for instance. And you take a look at it and you're just like, no, I'm really feeling a 4 today. Killing it. I think I'm a 4. This 4 feels good to me. That's not going to cut it when you talk to the regulators. It's not really, you can't just say, hey, we had a discussion. And as a group, we have a subject matter expertise that says we're a 4. I think there's got to be a lot more intelligent discussion that goes into that to determine exactly how you came to that 4. Where's the fidelity behind your answers? Where's the conclusions and how you got there? And where's the testing? And so strategic planning. I think you have to look at the threat environment today and really do a really good deep dive on your threat environment. You have to know who your adversaries are. You have to know your threat actor taxonomy, who those people are. So if you have a taxonomy that's typical that says maybe insiders in nation states, organized crime, activists, and terrorists, maybe you have a few of those. If you go to organized crime, for instance, who are the organized crime groups? What is the structure that makes up those groups? How do they operate? What are their TTPs? What are the typical IOCs that they use? And how would you recognize them if they were engaging you? You need to know these things, and their capabilities as well. So when you look at your threat assessment and then you look at your threat to capability in your organization, what are your capabilities to the threats? I mean, your adversary might have a very strong capability in a certain threat environment, but you might have a very strong defense and debt posture against that threat. So is that where you deploy your resources? It would be smart to deploy a lot of resources there? Probably not. So you have to really think about these things in that respect. You have to look at what your risks are that come out of those exercises, and then what we call sometimes material risks. So what are some of the risks that you have that have a very high probability of happening, have a very significant outcome when you look at your consequence impact matrix? So I think we think about that a lot, and then the strategy comes, right? What are the drivers? What are the pillars? The first thing that we do is we look at what are the business objectives. Right. So being part of cybersecurity is to run it like a business. Be business aligned. Speak the language of the business. Don't really go around going to business executives using a lot of tech talk or a lot of bits and bytes, because that's not what they want to hear. They want to hear that you're supporting and securing the technology that allows them to create revenue streams. Then the business objectives, you can look at the technology objectives, which is to supply the technology to the business, and then you want to secure that technology. So you take your threat assessments and your capability assessments, you look at your risk, and then you come up with, okay, this is going to be my strategy when you talk to the team. And you have your drivers and your pillars, your programmatic structure, and your operational model, and that's how you're going to execute. You come out with your goals and objectives at the end, and that's how you deploy your resources, I think. I think very key, a lot of people miss that, the actual finance, the budget piece, and the programmatic structure that's going to support those pillars in your strategy. have to be aligned, right? Those things have to be aligned. There has to be that synergy there between those groups.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you help us understand the role of intelligence-led cybersecurity models?
Sure. So I'm a big believer that your organization has to be an intelligence-led. It has to be an intelligence model. You have to be very threat-focused, as I mentioned before. There has to be this big learning loop, right? You have to have this learning organization in place, or this problem-solving process is always going back and forth, so the entire team is actually speaking to each other. A lot of times, I think I was just having a conversation before. There's so many people rolling out the fusion centers and fusion models, and what does that mean? And I think there's a lot of confusion about that. I think people think they have fusion, and I don't know if they really do. I think it depends. I mean, so I think there's a lot of different verticals in cybersecurity. There's a lot of different disciplines, and I think a real fusion model has, a presence of each one of those verticals inside a select team to make sure that we have a reach back capability to the larger teams, that everybody's on the same page. So it's not really your security operations center. It's not really your network operations center. Those aren't really fusion models, right? I don't think it's a different model. And so we look at that, and I think what you need to do too is really assess your intelligence capability, and not to scale to a lot of people. It's not more people. More people isn't exactly better. It's having the right people with the right skill sets in the different disciplines and intelligence that give you the information that you need to make critical business decisions. You gotta have a lot of fidelity in those sources of intelligence. You gotta understand where they come from. You have to analyze that on a regular basis. You have to take a look at the fidelity and what the confidence level is in each one of those sources. So, for instance, and I was having a discussion earlier before we came on, and we were talking about different sources of intelligence. For instance, application security attacks, application security infrastructure defense attacks. Do you have the same level of confidence in the sources that you get for those different types of threats as you do maybe for the insider threat or for third-party attacks? How are those intelligence models evolving, and what are people doing to get intelligence on those issues and those types of threats so that they can make informed decisions? Not as easy, I don't think, as saying, okay, here's an APT threat, or here's a theft threat, or incremental malware, destructive malware, things like that. It's not the same game, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So, one of the common themes through all of the answers that you kind of had is mostly around the talent crisis, and I think that we all are, kind of in the same boat on that. Do you have a solution, or do you have specific ways that you're kind of working around that in your organization?
So one of the things that I think everybody notices is that for some reason there's not a lot of women in cybersecurity. There just isn't. And so we started looking. We go to the universities and we go to the computer science classes, and there is many women in there, right? So really, when you look at the talent that we're throwing at the cybersecurity space in general, it's really half the brain. The other half of the brain is not there, and it's probably the better half, right? So we got to get those people in the room with us to help us solve these problems. I think if we were able to get more women involved in cybersecurity and computer science and engineering degrees out of the gate, it would help us with the talent crisis that we have today. Surely it would, because it's just so predominantly male, and so it kind of limits our ability to really look at the entire talent pool, right? And so I think that's one of the things. And I think the other thing is, just communicating. I think we have a lot of people that want to get into cybersecurity. We have technology folks. We have people that are in, to the intelligence business, and we need to teach them how to transform their skills and make that transition into the space. We need to build mentoring programs and have mobility programs, and think about this in an out-of-the-box way. And it can't be just in one organization or even one sector, right? This has to be cross-sector. I mean, there's no reason why we have 16 critical infrastructures. There's no reason why we can't have a mentoring program that allows somebody in one critical infrastructure to have a mentor that's in somewhere else, like telecom and finance, or energy and transportation. Right? I think that's key.
Do you think that there's certain certifications or anything that you recommend people who are trying to get in?
I'm not going to recommend anything specific, but there are certain certifications out there. I mean, I find that some of the if you're a good test taker, you can get all the certifications you want, right? I mean, I think, I'm looking around this room, there's a lot of smart people in this room. Know that just because you have a certification doesn't mean you're going to advance anything, but I will say that I do see a lot of requisitions that go out that have minimum requirements on them that say you need this certification. And so to have one certification is kind of tough to really, accept because, like I said, there's so many different disciplines that you can get into. And you can have a specialization in one different discipline in cybersecurity and not really know too much about another discipline. That's very, very possible.
Well, great. I really want to save some time to make sure that everybody gets a chance to ask some questions. So I don't know if we want to open it up to the floor now.
Just repeat the question. So I wanted to ask a more specific question around the whole approach to security at a major corporation. If I go back 18 months, 2 years ago, it seems like we were getting headlines every day. Target is breached.
Yeah.
JP Morgan is breached. Now we don't hear as much about that. So I think my question is that because we're immune to it and all these attacks are now not making the headlines, or have corporations figured out how to better address these attacks even as they're ever changing?
So I don't think we're immune to it, and I don't think they're just ignoring it because it just becomes everyday news. I still think the threat is out there. It's evolving. I happen to be very personally involved in both the Target and the JP Morgan Chase attacks. And so the intelligence, that was actually a big win for JP Morgan Chase, the team. I was still there when we discovered the attack. Discovering your own attack is a big win, right? You don't want someone else to call you up and say, hey, look, you got a problem. That's, you don't want that call. And so, but that call happens a lot. And, to be honest with you, I think every information security team should expect that call. And so when you look at the financing and sort of the prioritization around your cybersecurity ecosystem, it used to be a long time ago, prevention was the key. How are we going to keep them out? That's not the way it is anymore. We don't look at that. I don't look like that at all, right? I think the ecosystem is, not only the prevention piece, but also the identification part. The response piece is critical, and the recovery piece is just imperative, right? And so you have to put just as much effort into each one of those aspects of the ecosystem as something else. I mean, so as far as the media goes, I think if a big attack happens, you'll hear about it. But certainly there's a lot going on out there. The threat is prevalent, and it's not only the critical infrastructures anymore. I'm sure Sony didn't think that a special unit in the North Korean military was their adversary when they started building their strategy. I'm pretty sure it wasn't listed in there, but I can guarantee you it's listed in there now.
So, in your position, is technology, we talk about the background and everything, but as a computer science background, would it be in your interest to know what technologies I should ban from my organization? To bring your own device and everything. Or, for example, what open source project I should not support or should support? That's the first question. The second one, what you said about prevention and intervention. One trend I think is happening in security is that maybe we cannot prevent people coming in, but sending data out, monitoring what's being sent out from our network. It's the same analogy of someone, going into a mall, a shoplifter, but someone picking up a security guard telling him, you have something you stole, you cannot leave.
Right.
Is that something,
That's a great question. So I think the first one is very prevalent at least in the financial sector. Everybody's always thinking about what technology we should and should not use. There's whole teams of people, dozens of people in financial looking at and testing and going through user acceptance testing and vulnerability assessments and red teaming. And there's a lot of effort that goes into this, right? It's not something that it's very new. I don't think. I think it's been it's pretty prevalent. Now the other piece of it is interesting because sure there's data that goes out. Most of the firms I believe in the financial sector are pretty strong in terms of their data protection, or I should say, understand that there's a data protection element, right? So when you look at your DLP programs, there's a whole different types of ways of looking at things, and I think it depends on each individual's risk appetite and the needs of the business. So you can go to an organization and say, well, I'm going to shut off the external email to Gmail accounts and Yahoo accounts, right? Webmail. I'm just going to shut that off. And another business might say, well, we can't do that because it's a major piece of our business, how we communicate with our customers. So it's really, when I talked about before being business aligned, you really need to be business aligned, right? So the other thing is, you mentioned something pretty key about that. It's not only that the information is leaving the company. I think A lot of corporations look at information that's accidentally leaving the company, and somebody wants to work from home, and they can't, they want to, they send a PowerPoint or something confidential to their, home address or something, and it's not malicious, right? It's not malicious, but, there's a difference between malicious and non-malicious exfiltration of data. And I think the more important piece of what we're talking about here is how do you distinguish the difference, right? How do you distinguish the difference, right? And so what we're looking at now is in the industry, I think that's being spread out in terms of the theories and the strategy is, okay, we can't have DOP folks and SSDOP folks and the SOC and investigations, intelligence, and so there's all these people hunting, actually operating in myopic environments, right? What we want to do is have, collaboration efforts, tools that allow us to say, okay, if a person shows up at midnight and they're not supposed to be working at midnight, and, and they're in there, and maybe they're sending an abundant amount of information outside externally, and they make certain phone calls, or whatever the models you want to put together. There's all kinds of things that you can do as an organization, I think, and it's just really just looking at the data in a different way. I think organizations across all the infrastructures have the data. There's a lot of data. It's just how are you using it? Right? That's the key.
So you talked earlier about, it was great when networks were self-contained entities and you controlled everything. And then with the advent of the internet and business relationships, everyone now is interconnected. So you're right. It's no longer a question of if, but when, and then what happens. And what we're seeing is it's gotten even worse now because we've got suppliers and third parties that are part of that interconnected chain and we're exchanging information. And what's really troublesome that we see is it's not the large third parties that I'm doing business with like IBM. Because IBM, for the most part, I realize is going to do a relatively decent job from a compliance perspective. It's that small little company that I'm doing business with that's a key supplier. And I may have hundreds and hundreds of those guys out there. And I have no way of assessing their security posture. And each one of those is an attack vector or an open pathway in the data. And I can't contain that.
So, a huge problem, and I touched upon it briefly when I started talking about it in the intelligence-led strategy. So if you have an intelligence-led strategy, how does it bump up against your third-party assessments? It's really hard, right? It's not something that comes to mind like right away, like this is something we've been doing for 10 years and this is how we do it and it works. And we have a lot of fidelity and confidence in that model specifically. And so I think this is an evolving type of assessment. So to your point, a lot of organizations out there in many different infrastructures and critical infrastructures have very comprehensive third-party assessment programs, and that let's put this requirements of a third party. And these small firms can't meet those requirements, not even close. So then you have, you go through this business risk exception process, and there has to be someone in the business that wants to do business and that says that they're critical enough, and there's no way they can meet this as the insurance requirements or anything yet. I'm going to sign off on this. So there's a risk exception there, and that's part of it. That's part of risk appetite, right? Anybody who's a risk exception knows that these things happen. This is what people get paid to do. But it presents a challenge. It presents a challenge. So how do you treat those firms, and what do you do? And right now, when you say everybody's interconnected, it's like almost an understatement, right? I mean, it's out there, right? And so it's definitely challenging. I don't want to say too much about how I feel about exactly what to do, and just to preface my opinions that I express here on my own and not my companies. But I have some strong opinions about that. I think we'd be better off maybe unsaid right now. But I think it's definitely something to think about in those models and how to do that.
Yeah. You were mentioning your intelligence panel. Do you encourage your people to do ultimate reading during the day that they can also handle, maybe find something somebody else didn't see?
Reading?
Like, we got the register, we got dozens of websites out there that things get posted to. Do they do any kind of intelligence of themselves of what could be a possible vulnerability to the equipment they're working on, or something for that effect?
Sure. I think some of the more robust intelligence programs have people who package this stuff together. And it's been put in like, daily briefs, you have all kinds of things. You have probably monthly vehicles, quarterly journals, and there's all kinds of things that you can do from an intelligence perspective. Some of those smaller companies that maybe don't have a robust program that, puts those tools together for folks, well then, I think it would be a requirement for them to have them do it themselves, right? I think it's only prudent for them to be out there doing that. And you shouldn't really depend on everything that's going to be in your daily brief either. But I think today, at least in the financial sector, it's prevalent if you go to the top 10 financial institutions that there are probably several documents that go out that help combine a lot of the stuff that goes on out there so that people can, quickly see what's going on today, what are the emerging threats and risks that they're looking at, and so to be kept up to date, right? Yeah. It's a necessity. It's just really around law, and you have to do it, right? Yeah.
Any thoughts on what blockchain technology is?
Well, I don't want to say too much about that. I mean, it's a discussion I think that we have all the time. I think there's a lot of different opinions out there about it. From a security perspective, I think I'm gonna pass if you don't mind on that one. But it's a big topic right now.
So it will have an impact, a big impact, one way or another.
Depends.
Okay.
Depends. I would say this. I would say, there are discussions, right?
Sure.
I mean, we're very aware of it. We're very aware of, the environment. Yeah.
So what do you think of the recent trend of crowdsourcing vulnerability analysis, and how does it affect strategy?
As far as crowdsourcing, how does it affect cybersecurity strategy?
I think you said crowdsourcing vulnerability testing.
So I think, is that what you said? All right, just want to make sure. I don't know that it changes the game too much in terms of, your strategy. A lot of people are learning how to do things a different way in terms of testing environments and testing networks. And I think there's a lot of skill sets out there now that are coming out of particular environments that allow you to do things that are manual in terms of looking for anomalies in operating systems and looking for anomalies in your network traffic outside of your automated tool set. And I think that is really smart, to do. I think that's really an intelligent thing to do. I don't think that you should just rely on your tools all the time. I think having a human looking at data is a good thing. Your ability to scale that is probably not too great. But you have to come up with a strategy and risk prioritization so that everything is risk adjusted. So if you're having looking at your riskiest, pieces of your network or your infrastructure, and then you sort of, check it off and move on to the next piece, that type of thing, have them come back and revisit it. And I think the combination of those automated tools and that sort of manual review, and a lot of the hunting teams that are out there now is, really the most evolving piece of the controls that people have.
You kind of had me at a no factor when you said that certifications, you don't want to put too much, but they're not necessary. I'm studying for my CISO for the last 6 months. But I've worked my way into basically being a security manager for a day. Then more of a physical security officer, managing physical security officer at this point. Is there mentorship programs that you could suggest for someone to take that next step instead of going by the certification route?
So as I suggested before, that the mentorship program should be created. There's not one that I know of that goes across sector and things like that. You have mentorship programs inside corporations. I know the FSISAC actually has a mentorship program now that they're rolling out to roll out, and specifically within finance. So if you're in finance, you can try to get in finance, right? So you would have to look maybe at your ISAC. Maybe they have something similar. So I would suggest looking at that. And I'm not saying that certifications aren't valuable. I'm just saying that it depends on your grasp of the information, right? It really depends. When I was in the Secret Service, we took a 2-week boot camp and then we took the test.
How was that?
The test?
The boot camp.
The boot camp was, it's not my favorite thing. if you're asking, would I rather be at the Yankee game drinking beer? The boot camp wasn't too much fun. But, I passed the test, thankfully, and we just moved on. But, it's there's a lot of positions out there that have the CISSP on there. Right? Yeah.
How much of the problems that you see in cybersecurity are identity related? If we could just solve the identity problem where we know somebody was on their phone, on the internet, at checkout, at system login, would most of the other things disappear with it? Or is that just a small subset of all of the problems?
So the identity of the consumer or the identity of the employee?
Identity of everybody, both. Who knew that the person was who they said they were?
Right. So I think you're seeing a lot of startups, and probably some people in this room are probably excited about a lot of this stuff because they think this is an emerging technology. So what about programmable biometric authentication? It's really, really neat stuff, right? I mean, when you can do things on the fly for certain issues, so look at the models that, financial institutions have, telecom institutions have in place today. When somebody wants to authenticate into the system, they have a certain level of authentication. Maybe there's multi-factor authentication. Remember, if you have a 16-point MFA model and you're only using 2 because of that customer experience, right? If I ramped it up to 14, then we wouldn't have this problem anymore. We wouldn't be talking about an identity problem, but we wouldn't have any customers either. So we wouldn't be in business and I wouldn't have a job. Right? So as security people, you tend to say, okay, I can secure this easy. Why don't they do this? They don't do it because the customers won't tolerate that. Right? So there's that fine line. It's the understanding of the risk appetite and where it's going to be to maximize your revenues and your customer base and also have that acceptable level of risk that, as a risk executive, you're willing to take to make sure that you're profitable. So, yeah, but I think on biometrics, there's a lot of really cool technology out there today. That's just, I've seen a lot of it in the last few weeks. It's just amazing. And it's
solve all problems, or
I don't think anything. I think anyone who comes up here and tells you that he doesn't have a grasp of what's going on out there. Right? Yeah. One more question?
Yeah, one more.
All right.
I had a conversation with the CISO of a major financial institution several weeks ago. And in talking about the child crisis, one of the things he said he found as a success factor for his employees was having curiosity and the ability to ask questions. So in your experience, what would you find to be a success factor at the people you work with now and then also in other companies you work for?
So it depends on that. So it depends on the discipline. So we don't like to use cybersecurity so much because there's really, the difference between information security and cybersecurity and what are the disciplines that usually make up cybersecurity? I think you'll find if you ask 10 people, probably 10 different answers, right? So everybody kind of thinks about it differently. So the information security space, if I want to look at an architecture engineering team and what makes them successful, I don't think it's going to be the same thing if I'm building my intelligence team. And quite frankly, it's not going to be even close, right? It's going to be 2 different types of personalities, I think, 2 types of skill sets. What I like to think is let's not hijack diversity by just saying let's hire people from different parts of the world or anything. And the other thing too is people can not look like each other, but they can go live in the same place, go to the same school, have the same job, and they ask them the same question, they're going to get the same answer, right? You want diversity of thought, right? Diversity of thought, and that's I think what makes the team really successful because you have a lot of out-of-the-box thinking. That's when you're really innovative and you come up with some really disruptive technologies and some things that you can really, push that forward advances and, sort of keep ahead. Because the threat environment's agile, it's flexible out there, right? You have to be, the bigger your organization is, you're like a big ship in the ocean with a bunch of speedboats attacking you, and you got to try to figure out how you're going to defend yourself. But I think, so the skill sets are very different. We talked about before about, law enforcement. If you're going to be in the investigative team and you're doing cybercrime, you probably want someone who has skills with handling informants, interviewing people. Right? I don't know if the developer really needs to have interviewing skills, but if you're in the investigative side and you're actually talking to a potential insider, then you probably need to know and have a feeling of some interviewing techniques, what that person's doing, reading body language, and those types of things. So I think it's very different. It's not really a catch-all answer for it.
Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you.